Hey everybody, welcome back to The Collective. We have another fantastic show for you planned out today. I am stoked. We got the return of Doc Gino. It has been a while. And Dan, the man, soon to be Dr. Dan, very excited about that. Sean, as always, is here. I am pumped for this show. Now, while I am pumped, you should be too. Hit those buttons, like the show, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, do all the good stuff, get your emails whenever we go live, which is, of course, Fridays for The Collective and Wednesdays for The Gold Mine. If you have any thoughts, questions, comments, anything at all, put them up in the comment section. We can engage those throughout the show. Other than that, let's get some intros, and then we'll get right into the convo. Dan, you're on top. 10 to 15 seconds. Who are you? Where you come from? All that good stuff.
I'm Dan. I'm an ex-soldier. I was a medic in New Zealand Army before getting out, having a pretty average professional career in kickboxing and MMA, and then finding a new lease of life and coaching high performance. And I'm about to be a newly minted clinical psychologist as well, which I do spend a couple of days in clinic doing that.
Bam, love it. Doc Gino,
awesome sauce, man. Doc G, behavioral scientist, do a ton of work with the special operations community here in the United States. Wrote a book called The 7 Layers of Successful Relationships, primarily honing in on the relationship that we all have with ourselves. And man, I'm just stoked to be here with you guys, man. I love these convos. I'm all about getting nitty gritty with Dr. Dan today, for sure, for sure.
It has been too long, brother.
Indeed.
John, how's life in the mountains?
Things are good. I love hanging out with nerds, so bring the nerdery.
Like it.
I'm down. All right, let's get this kicked off. I have my very first question for you guys has to do with the definitions of recovery in general. So when you look up recovery, it means to get back, or you look at the etymology of recovery, it means to get back. But in the terms of physical recovery, in terms of mental recovery, in terms of all these things, is recovery actually getting it back, or is it rebuilding into something new? And I just want to give a quick example is, I think there's an old fable about this, but like how many pieces of a ship need to be replaced until it's a new ship kind of thing. So I'm wondering, what are you guys' thoughts on this right off the bat? Gino, I'm going to hit you first. What do you got?
I'm going to note as you're talking right now, because I'm thinking about this, right? So homeostasis matters, right? So the idea of having a baseline, the idea and concept though of recovery, right? Especially if we're thinking about it longitudinally, right? And we're thinking about it in a holistic sense, there is a semblance of whatever you're recovering from, you don't necessarily want to go back, right, to the homeostatic levels you had before, because the idea is if you're going to push yourself or the upper limit of the capacity of what you're able and capable of doing, there should be some sort, right, of growth that happens along the way, though that's not always the case, right? Because a lot of times whatever pushed us outside of that homeostatic shift could be detrimental to us, right? Which means there's scar tissue and what we do with that scar tissue. So I think off the cuff, man, a definition for recovery, right? It's not just a return. I think there's also a rehabilitative component to it as well. That really very much takes into account physical, mental, social, and spiritual. I think all 4 of those come into play when we're talking about it from a holistic sense. But just off the hip, that's what comes to mind.
Love it. This is the way to start a conversation. Awesome. Dan, how about yourself, man? What are you thinking?
That was a good answer. Can I just follow that? I was really hoping you're going to just hand us some definitions of recovery. When I saw the title for today, I was like, this means so many different things to so many different people. Like I've worked in drug and alcohol counseling before. Recovery means something there. Obviously, I work in sports and performance. Recovery means something there. I work in clinical populations. Recovery means something different there. But I think one of the underlying principles here is this idea of hormesis, of this challenge to a system that, what's a challenge? It breaks down the system or it challenges its limits, and the recovery comes in when you're rebuilding from that. And recovery might not be back to baseline. And in fact, because you're a human being, you're always adapting to your environment. You're not the same person as you were before the challenge occurred. Hopefully that's a better place if you do recovery well, like if you go hit the gym, if you try and hit the gym straight afterwards, you're weaker. You haven't allowed recovery to take place. But, you know, if you eat well, if you sleep and keep stress under wraps, the idea is the next time you go to the gym, you can lift some heavier weights and you are better. So it's, I think, recovery done well. Yeah.
I'm liking this, Sean. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm with the docs on this one. However, I just want to like maybe bring it up to the 10,000-foot view and say that when people consider the word recovery, if that's all we're talking about right now is just recovery, often society denotes recovery as a negative. Like you're recovering. Dude, you got to get better. Dude, you were worse. Now you got to get better. And so recovery generally has a negative connotation, whereas as is already being proposed, it can have you going backwards, but it can have you going forwards. And so I'm going to start off with the idea that if everyone should focus on recovery, but if your focus is on you're broken and you need to fix yourself, that's a mindset. And I'd like to suggest that recovery is not you're broken. Recovery is you are what you are, but you're moving forward into the future to a better version of yourself. And so with that simple theme in mind, to move forward into a better version of yourself, whatever you are right now, that does require certain key, simple tools that you can use, such as has already been suggested, managing stress or sleep, or these various things that we'll get into. So recovery is, I think, a word that has to have more positive attributes attached to it so that people can more positively engage in it.
I 100% agree. My first thoughts when I came up with this topic, when I was looking at the guests and trying to figure out what would be good to talk about, was the fact that a lot of people, especially for those that deal with post-traumatic stress or, an OSI or something like that, is the fact that we have this concept of who we used to be before the injury, right? We used to be this soldier, we used to be this police officer, we used to be whatever it was. And that recovery means that we are going to get that back. But that never comes back. That person is gone, right? And now you're a totally new person. So I think you're right on the money here, Sean, in terms of the fact that it's a negative connotation. I think it has to do with just the fact that we're trying to imagine ourselves as a past self, at least in my mind. What do you guys think on that? Gino, I'm going to hit you back. What do you got?
Man, so now we're knocking on the door, right, of identity management, right, and the importance, right, of recovery in that process. And the funny thing about it is, Sean, you're absolutely right in the sense of the cultural loading of the negative connotation that can be presented with recovery, right? And at the same token, every single one of us goes through the process of recovery every single day, right? I mean, like sleep, that's the biggest form of recovery, right? For our body, that's a big deal, right? But then also just how it is we're filtering out, right? All the stimuli, man, that we are hit with every single day. And the hits that come, the challenges that come, the adversities that come, right? That have micro shifts, right? And moving the needle in who we are and how we perceive ourselves, particularly if we are not well grounded, right? And have that firm baseline and what it is that we believe we stand for and our place in this world. So I think, when we really start to unpack the idea of recovering and returning back to what I once was, that's not a reality. I think that what we're actually trying to say is, let's get back to some semblance of a baseline, right? Where there's not a lot of volatility and there's not a lot of incoming fire on a regular basis that can shapeshift how it is I'm dealing with life every single day, right? Especially in the world of TBI and PTSD or PTS. So I think a big thing there is, how do we define, right, who we are at a level that is charged with resiliency and has enough insulation in it, right, to be able to deflect those hits to where it doesn't hit us so hard that knocks us off course, right, to a point to where we need to get back to a baseline, right? So I can get hit, right, but as long as I'm holding on to something and it pushes me offside, but I haven't let go yet, right, boom, pull back, I'm there, right? The moment I get hard enough and it knocks me off the bike completely, right, and Sean, I think bike because I watch your videos all the time and I freaking love them, right? But like that's a big gap, right? Because I'm falling and I'm tumbling down the mountain versus no, I still have some semblance of control. But that is always a question of quality and depth of relationship that people have in their understanding of themselves, right? And their place in the world, right? Which is that's identity management, man. So let me pause there because I can go down a big rabbit hole on this one. I want to hear from everybody else.
Welcome to the rabbit hole show. Dan, you got thoughts on this?
Yeah, I really like that getting knocked off your bike analogy. That was I had this beautiful graph drawn in my doctoral thesis of what we found, this idea that which was born from the literature, that obviously too many traumatic events traumatizes people. There seems to be that's perhaps not shocking, but what the literature did show was that it was actually this in this curve of if you had no adversity in your life, you actually did worse than people that had some adversity in your life, and then too much, they dropped back off again. Maybe not shocking to hear, but that's a pretty novel finding. But what I did with my research is did something like, okay, these guys experience these things on deployments, military deployments, get shot at, friends die, potentially traumatic events, it's called. And they kind of incrementally added to flourishing after deployment in some people. But as soon as post-traumatic stress arrived on the scene for that person, their flourishing dropped off like a cliff. It was very strongly negatively related to it. So what I took from that, and the nice picture I built, you're gonna have to bear with me. I'm gonna describe a picture of this like positive effects going up across time, and then just a cliff. They hit that threshold, and then post-traumatic stress takes off after that. The way I thought about that was this idea of like you can recover from so much. You can have less negative symptoms, you get more positive symptoms until you can't, and then you can recover from that, but it's hard to unring that bell if you've worked with enough veterans for 10, 20, 30, 40. One of my veterans, Vietnam veteran, still having difficulties and doing the right stuff. So, yeah.
It's like, the straw that broke the camel's back, or, when you're thinking about bridge mechanics as well, is that there's only a certain amount of weight over top of the gap that you can manage before you're going in. And it's kind of different based on your structure. Sean, you got any thoughts on this?
I do. And the thoughts that I have on this subject that we're speaking specifically about now, I had about an hour and a half ago. And and I was mentioning in the green room that I just came out of, I've just been writing a fairly large document on the neuroscience of time through the ancient philosophies right through to modern neuroscience, kind of a historical timeline, and various characters like Einstein, or doesn't matter who, a bunch of people who've got an opinion on this matter or science-based evidence on this matter. And so as I was thinking about time and our perception of it, it dovetails into specifically what you just said, Dan, because in my mind about an hour and a half ago, I was considering recovery to some degree through the lens of intensity and frequency. And by frequency, I don't mean a wavelength. I mean how often it occurs. And so I think that every human has to be able to manage intense moments throughout their lives, but some do it better than others. And much like homework, I think you get better at it through time, over time. And so the more intense situations you face, more frequently that you face them, the more you become capable of moving through them and processing them and learning from them. However, I do believe that there is a stopgap limit or a moment in time for everyone where it all just becomes a little too much. Now, I'm not referring to maybe someone who has a completely sedentary lifestyle that doesn't have enough inputs or enough variables that are coming into their life that it's a bit overwhelming. But I think that most people are in a trajectory where at some point in their life, something becomes overwhelming. Maybe not everyone, but I think most people. And so it comes down to that frequency and intensity of moment. But then, finally, to my point, as it accumulates, I do believe there's a moment where we have that cliff. And it's literally what I just came out of thinking about is this neuroscience of time. And so if someone understands how time works from a neurological processing level, all of the various parallel mechanisms that are helping us understand either through the prefrontal cortex or the insula or whatever it is, all of the various neural mechanisms that are happening anyway, I believe that the better we understand those things and the better that we can frame our actual real lives connected to our neural life, I think there's advantages to that. I think there are advantages to understanding that we aren't just victim to time or victim to circumstances or victim to not being able to recover. I do believe that the deeper we think about our neural connectivity to the world, our internal connectivity to the world, our framing of the external world, all of these things are just levers to help someone move past that cliff moment. That's my thoughts.
Let's go around again on that. Dan, I'm going to hit you. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, I like that. I'm going to push back a little bit. One of the things that really stuck out is this idea of resilience. I spent my wheels for like 6 months on this topic, trying to pin down what is it, how do we measure it, what factors go into it, and then sidestepped it because it was just too hard to operationalize. But one of the things that really leapt out there is what seems to happen for people who are really resilient, who can get through really difficult things, is they also that connection between challenging event to flourishing stops being as effective. It's almost like they're not forced to be, they're not challenged, so they're not forced to update how they view themselves, their social connections, how they view the world. That doesn't update because that's just whatever. That's just noise. It's not signal. So I think, and that has been associated with openness to experience, or a lack of openness to experience. Curiously, I don't know what that relationship is between the two, but there's certainly, as resilience goes up, openness to experience goes down. Maybe people who are not open to experience tend to put themselves in tough situations and become resilient. I don't know. But yeah, resilience can be a good thing, can also mean that you might also miss out on some of the joys that adversity might serve you as you move through life. Yeah, that's about as far as I got with that thought. That's a half-finished thought. Yeah.
Roger that. I'm tracking where you're going, though. This sounds really good. Gino, what do you got? I see you taking notes.
Yeah. So I'm going to push back a little bit as well, right? So two things, right? So first and foremost, and Dan, this is to the point that you had mentioned, right? As far as the bell curve that's out there that talks about hyperarousal and low arousal and optimal levels of performance. So that's the York-Dotson law, right? And so it's this bell curve that goes up, and it says intermediate levels of drive, smack right in the middle of that bell curve, right, is where optimal performance will be achieved. What does that actually mean, right? It's balance, right? So it's not, you don't have low drive and you're not like burning all cylinders all the time, right? It's intermittent pulse, boom, 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 right? So we're able to maintain and kind of develop that homeostasis that we're talking about, that baseline of sorts, right? But the thing is that so many of us forget that we are designed to deal with adversity, right? Like it's not the type of thing where, adversity comes in waves, right? And it's very much, it's what we make it, right? And this is where perception very, very much matters, and emotional regulation very much matters. And Sean, to your point, talking about firing off from a prefrontal cortex perspective and the framing of what's happening, right? Well, to everyone who's pretty much, I would assume, dialing in on this show, right? you had a good relationship, a healthy relationship with adversity and challenge, right? If not, you're not going to spend the time and invest right into these sorts of conversations, right? So how it is that we are going to deal with some sort of life altering event, and how it is that someone whose only perception of adversity is from a video game and losing all the time, right? Or having some big challenges going to deal with it. It's going to be different, right? And that's normal. That's natural, right? But what we're talking about here is what's called allostasis and allostatic load, right? Dan, in your studies, is that something you've come across at all?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Right. So like the amount
kind
of
of
stress that we're carrying at any given time, right? Essentially, right? So the idea, right, of all of us at any given time have a particular allostatic load, right? That's normal. We all carry stress in some form or some capacity. The defining factor there is how is it we adapt that stress to be productive and work for us instead of it working against us, right? And so those small wins, those being able to kind of rise to the occasion and not miss out on opportunities for growth, because we're always open arms and saying, oh, this is going to suck. Great. I can't wait for it. It's going to be so much fun, right? Versus this is really going to suck and I'm not looking forward to it. And the quality and depth of the reward that's on the other side, because like, wow, we just overcame that. And I didn't think I would be able to, versus me walking in and saying, I'm going to crush it. I don't care how hard it is. Like, I'm going to get on my bike. I'm going to follow Sean all throughout the mountains. I don't care how fast he's going. I'm keeping up, right? And maybe I do, maybe I don't, right? But yes, it's in good effort. But at the same token, like, let's call a spade a spade. Like, let's be real with ourselves, right? Because the prefrontal cortex can absolutely play tricks on us. And this is where the balancing act comes into play, where it's like expectation management is important. Believing in yourself is very important, right? But let the facts be the facts. This is one of the most important things too in the world of mixed martial arts, right? With jiu-jitsu, that makes it so different, right? If you suck, you're going to find out real fast that you suck, right? You can't fake the role, right? This is no different, right? When we're talking about life in general, what are the expectations that you have set forth? How do you adapt, right? The skills and the understandings that you have to be successful, but still recognizing that I'm not good at this. This is not going to be fun, but do I have the grit and the fortitude to push through it to eventually get to the other side? Well, I'll have the opportunity to recover, right? But now's not the time for that. Mouthful. Sorry, guys.
No, it's all good. This is it lends itself to kind of almost a military training style modalities in terms of, when you go into basic, it's immersion, right? Most people show up to basic training in, adequate shape, but the instructors are there to drive them and push them and drive. And just like, we're going to push and push and push and push. And no matter what you do or think or say, we're going to keep going. until you either snap completely or you rise to the occasion. And I think this is kind of part of that recovery idea, is that there is, even in that system, there is recovery built in. There are periods of sleep. There are periods of rest. There are periods of maybe admin work or sedentary work or something like that, where, you're polishing boots. Right? You may not be sleeping, but you're resting to a degree. I think it plays into this at least a little bit. Sean, you got any thoughts on this?
Yeah, well, using your example as the example, it might be the case that is the construct, but the problem with that construct of basic training is most people in basic training don't understand the construct. They're just in it. They don't understand it. They don't understand the rule set. They don't actually understand the matrix that they're in at that moment. They're just in it. And so for someone to do well in basic training, for someone to actually do well recovery in a recovery sense, you have to understand that you're not just polishing boots. Or while you're polishing boots, you've got to understand all things about the boot, all things about you, all things about the moment. What you're actually doing in the moment is relevant to your example, because if someone is just burning time throughout their day polishing a boot and then moving on to the next thing and on to the next thing and on to the next thing, it is just a sequence of events, or it's a chain of life that they aren't in control of. They're just party to. So therefore, to some degree within basic training, some of your agency is stripped away from you. And I'm saying that loosely, but that stripping of agency sometimes will preoccupy someone's sense of who they are or the mindfulness of the moment. It will interrupt their most effective and efficient way of living in that moment, because they don't know who they are in that moment. They have become less about themselves and they have become more about the construct that they're in. In other words, they've forgotten who they are as they're polishing their boot. They just know that they have to polish a boot. And so it's the deeper thinking, I find, that improves all things. So if we're talking about recovery as the example, we can talk about stress, we can talk about sleep, we can talk about hydrating well and making sure your macros are good and making sure that, you know, you plan to have your boots done ahead of time rather than panicking, and all these little details. We can talk about all of that stuff. But I think at a much deeper level, the one that really actually impacts a person, moves the needle, you got to understand why you're doing all things, not just why you're polishing the boot, but why you're there, why you want to be there, why you don't want to be there. And so deep, deep thought will create more capable recovery sometimes than actually focusing on grabbing another glass of water.
I'm liking where this is going, and it leads directly into my next question, which is, I would want to ask you guys what advice you'd give to someone in, say, a high stress profession when they're trying to manage their recovery, trying to manage their burnout in situations like that, right? Like when you're deployed overseas, you're not going to be getting your macros set up the way you want them to. You're going to be eating what's available. When you're in training, similar stuff. When Sean, I'm sure when you were on your Pathfinder course, you weren't getting your perfect 3 meals a day set up exactly the way you wanted to with all of the, all of the stuff. You just had to kind of make do with what was there. Now, I understand the concept of why, but what would you tell someone now as they go through these professions and try to manage that recovery, that so that they don't just get destroyed, burnt out? Gino, I'm going to hit you first. What do you think?
So I think there's a time to be mindful, and I think there's a time to be mindless, right? And what I mean by that is, and it kind of goes part and parcel with the whole idea of trust the process, right? And whatever it is that you're enthralled in and involved with, right? How deep are you engaging in the thing, right, that you're focused on at that moment in time at a micro, right? And forgetting the macro that you're part of, which is part and parcel with what Sean is saying. But the switch, the discernment, the discipline that it takes to say, okay, where am I going to allow my thoughts to take me today, right? Because it is so easy if I'm becoming so mindful at that moment in time, right? And getting caught up, right, with this is it, this is what it's going to be, right? Versus let me turn the switch and dial it down and let me be a bit mindless, right? Let me turn this off, right? And do what it is that needs to be done, right? Because the more that we put as far as the meaning-making process behind it of the small stuff, and I'm not discounting it, right? But if you're asking from an advice perspective, how to give someone that nugget to continue putting one foot in front of the other, to stay in the fight, to actually accomplish whatever the objective is, sometimes you just got to push through, man. Like you got to you have to will it and not get caught up in the cycle of the woulda, coulda, shoulda, or the deeper meaning making assumptions, right? Because our brain loves to make assumptions, man. It does not like ambiguity. It's always trying to make sense, right? We have this thing, the reticular activating system, and it's constantly firing to try to connect dots, right? Stop connecting dots, man, right? Do the job. Keep focus forward at what the big picture is. Don't get caught up in the minutia. Right. There'll be a time where you can be mindful of all that. Get through it first.
I love that. Dan, thoughts?
Oh man, so many thoughts. So you came in real deep with that, Sean. I there's a couple of thoughts that come up. One was just discerning between what is training and building someone up and what is performing and exerting an established skills. Obviously, you can't train on 4 hours sleep and huge calorie deficit and super stress around the clock and expect that physical performance or emotional performance is going to go up. Well, a lot of training systems, military training systems will try to do that. If we want to optimize, we optimize for these other things. There's also times you need to get exposed to stressful environments, like chewing through hundreds of kilometers with a heavy pack on your back, when you're feeling what it feels like to have your feet just bones tired and with stress fractures, or to feel all those negative thoughts to come up, so that you have some way for that training to then map onto resilience, I guess you'd call that, an updating of the world. You can't have one without the other, I don't think. And I wholeheartedly agree with, there's this idea of you can grow. There's a time to reflect and assimilate, and there's a time to just get through it, man. Like this, we're getting after it. There's a time to grow. There's a time to perform. And the psychological literature is about that. If you were trying to make big meaningful interpretations during like a special forces evolution, then those people actually wash out really fast than the ones that go, okay, I don't care how much this hurts, I'm going to pick up these water bottles until my hands start, like the skin rips off, and I'm going to still keep going until some of the staff pull me off. Like, I don't need to learn from this, I just need to get through this. And there's good neuroscience for that. There's this whole default mode network, which is kind of designed to circulate what's the dangers, what's the problems I need to solve, and when you're really tired, that gets quite negative. But sometimes just feeding the brain something to do turns on this default positive network of, okay, I'm just going to walk to that tree over there, and I'm going to do that, and I'm going to worry about the next tree after that. It can be really helpful for not getting into an even worse mental negative space.
Don't want to sit and ruminate on how far that tree is away. You just want to start walking. Sean, any thoughts?
I do, and I agree. The mindlessness versus the mindfulness. If we just consider those two operating states, as Doc G kind of started us off with on just this one piece, I think it's really important. You know, Chance, you asked the question, or maybe you didn't ask the question. You mentioned Pathfinder course, of course, 70 days, 1 meal a day, 100-pound plus rucks, and all the good stuff. And so it's a real beatdown. But here's the thing. That was in 1987, and in 1987, I didn't understand sleep and stress and macros and hydration, and you know, Gatorade wasn't invented. So take it for what it is. Back then, it was different. I was different. And so when I was doing the Pathfinder course, I didn't have a whole bunch of nerdy reading under my belt. I wasn't enough of a nerd at that point to understand how to do what I was doing at many levels. I wasn't that intellectual. I wasn't that philosophical. I wasn't well read enough to understand when I was deep into it that, oh yeah, right. Einstein once said, that never came into my mind. Mm-hmm. And so what I did do, to Doc G's point, is not mindlessly, but definitely not mindful, I grinded my way through 70 days of hellacious workload. And so I think that's a really important point that Doc G raised, is no matter what you know or don't know, you can get through anything. You really can, as long as you focus up and understand why you're there. So I knew why I was there. I just didn't know how to get to the finish line, but I knew that I was going to head towards the finish line. And so that lesson taught me a lot in life, that even as dumb as I was in respect to the big macro understanding of what all things mean in life, I still managed to get her done. And so with not a lot of knowledge, you can do a lot of things. So never try to put the knowledge in front of the action if you can only choose one or the other. The action should always come first. The knowledge will come out of the action after the fact. So I do like the idea of commitment and reflection. They can operate simultaneously for sure. But if I can only choose one, I'll choose commit.
Gino, what do you got? Sounds like you got something on your mind.
So this is interesting, man. With a lot of folks, man, that I'm privileged to work with, we have this conversation. The conversation, especially when you're a high-performing, high-achieving individual, you take a lot of pride in being strategic, right? And your strategy comes from your principles, right? And then your strategy will feed your tactics. Your tactics are attached to certain attributes within those tactics. And that's great, and that's wonderful, especially if you consider yourself to be a responsible person, right? You're a high-performing individual, high-achieving individual. Those are great things, right? But the problem where we get caught up, right, especially utilizing and relying on intellect and the capacity to really fire off that prefrontal cortex to think ahead, use the imagination to plan for, well, what's next? And how do I prepare myself? How do I have a plan so I can reduce ambiguity, right? Which is the brain's number one enemy, right? To have the confidence to push through whatever that plan is, right? The challenge is this, is that when you are going through a hellacious suck fest like Sean is describing, right? You don't have the ability, right, to get caught up in tomorrow, because all you should be focusing on is today's problems. Tomorrow's problems, awesome. They're going to be there, right? Don't worry about them right now. All you need to worry about is the today problem, right? The tomorrow problem has its place. Yesterday's problem had its place. You got through it. Awesome. That's where you have to be able to have this adaptability, right? To bring down the function of commitment and what is you're committed to and your capacity to push through the adversity, right? And so if we're not in a place where we can compartmentalize at that moment in time and say, what do I need just to be able to put that one foot in front of the next? And you get caught up in all the other possibilities, man, you end up going afraid. Like we're our own worst enemy when it comes to that stuff. But it's really difficult, right? Because we're conditioned to say, well, you should be thinking ahead. You should be utilizing strategy and have all these A through Z contingency plans. And when you're in situations like that, that don't work for you. It doesn't. You're going to get caught up and you're going to fail, right? And that's where this whole entire premise of getting back and understanding your baseline, man, when you're talking about having a belief and a confidence, right? Confide, a belief in yourself and what you're able to do in that moment in time, because that moment in time is all that freaking matters. Everything else goes to the wayside. Relinquish your imagination for that moment in time. Enjoy the suck in that moment, right? But that's where, Dr. Dan, to your point, right? Finding the enjoyability, like how do you make this, right? To where you can show that resiliency factor and at the same time embrace the fact of this is not fun. I do not want to do this, knowing that on the other side is that reward, right? That we need to get that dopamine hit.
I got a question on that one in a second, but I want to get Dan, I want to get your thought on this before we get into that. What do you got?
Yeah, I think I did want to touch on something because I'm getting really excited about engaging with these really deep conversations. But I also realize there are people watching this podcast that might be going through it and need some tools to get through it. And I don't think I've been quite as explicit as I could have been about what I found in my practice, clinical practice, but also my research, that we find if you increase the amount of high quality food that you have, reduce some of the low quality food that you have, if you increase your sleep, if you engage in some physical activity, it can vary in intensity. You don't have to crush yourself, but you do need to move. This one's kind of sometimes in your control, sometimes not. Your social connections, vitally important. In fact, one of the strongest ways that you can get through things. If you're not connecting with people that are important to you, you're doing yourself a disservice. It could be friends, partners, that can be mates from your old unit, that is really supportive. And something that's maybe a lot less in control is we know actually leaders of people have a very real impact on how people feel. That might seem, well, yeah, if I have a dumb boss, I have a bad time. Now, this has a very real impact on things like post-traumatic stress, how that arcs across time, how your flourishing is. So I guess if you're in a really toxic work environment, these things can move the needle. It can change how you feel right now very significantly. But what my research showed is you can predict someone's symptoms 3 years later from some of these things. And even if this person changes the units, they go out in the field, their friends change, their eating changes, these things still predicted how they felt 3 years later. So I wanted to just throw it in there, just some actionable points.
Absolutely. That's it's fantastic. And you're actually like describing my last couple of years within the military. I was under some pretty poor leadership, and then and I was not happy where I was. I did get posted, and I really enjoyed where I was, but that's where all the symptoms started to come in from all the issues that I was dealing with at that point. I was at a couple years down the road. So that's I'm not surprised, but I'm surprised, if that makes sense. John, you got any thoughts on this?
I do. I'm going to throw something back to the docs here, and it's based on what they've both just said. And it's not a novel thought in my head, but the way it crystallized or synthesized itself up now, it seems worth mentioning. So I'm just going to talk briefly about 24-hour solo mountain bike races. Now, I'm going to use myself as an example. And I'm not going to talk about my very first 24-hour solo mountain bike race. I'm going to talk about me as a experienced or professional ultra endurance racer. So let's talk 20, 25, 30 24-hour solo races into my career. And so if it's my 25th race, I know that in that 24-hour solo mountain bike race, for the first portion of it, I'll be fresh as a daisy. And at some point, I'll be in the hurt locker. And then at some point, I'll be looking around me, looking for the win. And so at some point, I have to dig so deep in my workload capacity output that math becomes difficult. So up until that point, I'm doing all the math. I'll see someone up on the trail, up on the horizon, we'll call it. And I'll be able to ascertain, okay, they're 3 minutes up. It's going to take me 7 minutes to claw them if I do this pace. It's going to take me 10 minutes if I do that pace. And I can do all kinds of math. Lots of math. And I can do all the tactics and I can do all the strategies. But at some point in the race, I am so freaking crushed that math goes out the window. And then you just exist in it. And so as I'm existing in it, I'm still racing. I'm still competing. I'm still in it to win it. But my higher order of functioning, my nuanced intellect, that's gone, baby. I'm lucky if I remember to drink every 5 minutes. And so all of my really important things are taking all of my intellect. All of the other stuff is offloaded autonomously that I've been doing for years and years and years. So then it comes down to almost the luxury stuff, like thinking about strategy and thinking about tactics. They are gone, man. If you've worked so hard that you're so fatigued, eventually you just exist and do your best. If you're trying to do your best. And so I find that moment in a race is something that I'd love to bottle, throw a label on, call it mindfulness or call it whatever you want, call it being aware of who you are in the moment, and have everyone on the planet drink a bottle of it. Because I find that maybe more people could experience more moments where they're so, we'll call it in the hurt locker, that it removes all of the white noise. And the only signal they're getting at that moment is who they are in that moment. And so recovery to some degree, intellectually or emotionally or physiologically, you can move the needle in various ways in the real time based on the reserves you've got based on all of your experiences and whether you ate a good meal the day before. But I find that some of the clarity that people are missing is when they don't have all of those little luxuries of being well fed and well slept up. And so what are your thoughts on the pureness of a signal that requires great fatigue, great effort to get to a point where you truly are getting a clean signal? What are your thoughts on that?
This is a great question. I do want to just throw this in real quick because I got the image in my head of Sean bottling his sweat and calling it Namaste by Sean. Just like people perfuming themselves with it.
By Akko Raban.
There you go. But
I want a
Dan,
bottle.
there you go. Dan, what are your thoughts on Sean's question? I'm hitting you, Dan. What do you got?
I was never as good as an athlete as Sean, not even close. But I do like to, I hate to say it because I know how this is going to get received in this crowd. I do long distance running recreationally. My next race is planned is 100K round, like trail around a mountain, like around a couple of mountains. And I've done enough of them to know what it's going to feel like about 2/3 onwards. My fueling strategy is going to be good. My rest leading up to that probably pretty good, but I just know my world's going to collapse in, and I'm just going to be moving, trying not to trip over on the terrain, and just keep moving. And I think I've done most of mine actually solo, not in a structured race. Just let everyone know where I am, carry a little locator beacon, and gone, because I know how hard it is for maybe help to reach me, and that pushes me way, way beyond where I might go. Actually, I'm tired. I'm going to call help now. So I know they're going to take hours to get there. And that's when I've been so past that and being pushed because I had to, where I've actually reached that. Like, I don't want to say it's an easy moment because you're still suffering, but it's like life's really simple. I just got to keep moving right now. And I've had similar thoughts, like I wish other people could have this feeling, but I know the suffering that is necessary to feel that. And I really, maybe this is going to go on a tangent. I'm totally not answering your question right now. But this idea that you can't avoid hard things. You need hard things. Us as humans need a bit of adversity, like trees that are grown in a lab don't build roots and they just fall over. We need some friction. We're designed. We need it to grow. And I think the really depths of our souls, how we're created, the depths of our brains do need it to get the best out of it ourselves. Yeah.
I could not agree more with that one. Gino, thoughts?
Man, I'm taking notes that I want to fire off right now. Okay, so, wow. Okay, yeah. So definitely, I love the idea of to figure out a way to bottle up that particular sentiment, right? Because where my mind goes, right, is we have as a species, right, we have gotten to a place where we spend too much time, right? This is just a personal opinion. Too much time in the world of comfort and luxury, right? And actualization, right? And what do I mean by that? I'm not saying that actualization is bad, right? I'm saying the way in which that we actually practice actualization, right? Obviously, if we just look at some basic health statistics, right, of obesity, right, and diabetes and sedentism and so on and so forth, not to even mention, right, issues surrounding depression and anxiety because of sedentary behavior, right? And having luxuries like walking to the liquor store, right? Walking to the beef market or whatever it is, right? Like the idea of putting in work to achieve a reward, right? They should go part and part, like they should go together. They do go together, right? Biologically, psychologically, it's designed to go together, right? But we have lived in a time in a post-agrarian society and culture where you don't have to do a whole lot anymore, right? To get the basic needs, to check off each box of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, not hard to do anymore. It's really not, right? If you live in a first world type country. So this idea of what you're saying, Sean, of man, you get to a certain point, man, and you stop being able to do math, right? Because your body is in such a high load. You're carrying such a load now. You've expended so much from a caloric burn perspective, and your brain is in hyper overdrive as far as just get through it. Just get through it. You know what you have to do. This is the 50th time that you've done this, right? But now we're starting to conserve, right? So we can really focus on, instead of that prefrontal cortex, now we're talking hypothalamus and hippocampus, right? Now we're shifting to areas of the brain that have to do with like specifically task orientation to get through it, right? That is the grind. That is the fight. That is the battle that we're designed to do, but we don't do enough of, right? And as a species, I think all of us can see the consequences of what's happening in society since we don't do enough of it. I get a taste of that when I roll in jiu-jitsu, right? And coach is like, hey, 10-minute rounds tonight. That's the entirety of drill of practice tonight. Awesome. That's great, bro, because by the time I get to round 4, I'm breathing out of every orifice that I have. I can't think about even getting in my car tonight, let alone what I'm going to do next. But the reward that I feel when I walk out of that gym when I'm done, oh my gosh, man, like I'm a new man, right? And I wouldn't have it any other way. My recovery that night when I'm sleeping is amazing. I get up feeling completely refreshed because of the battle that I put myself through, right? But I earned it. I worked for it, right? That means you have to relinquish some of these other things, right, that get fired off within the prefrontal cortex and higher functioning, right, because we have the luxury to spend so much time there, right? And again, not always bad, right? But I wish we were at a place where we understood the value of that and the balance that is necessary to maintain it.
Bam. I'm going to use that, just so you know. I'm going to do 10 5-minute rounds to my guys in jiu-jitsu tomorrow. we're gonna get smoked. It's gonna be great. I have a question for you guys, though. It's in line with this because we talked about compartmentalization just a second ago, and I think that when you're going through those difficult time periods and you're just in the suck in the moment, life does get compartmentalized, right? All the other stuff just off the side isn't necessary right now. Boom. But it also happens, stressful environments, stressful situations, traumatic incidents, all these things. If you have work to do, you can compartmentalize the actual emotional being of it, and you're just, I got stuff to do. But that can go too far, right? Like it's a good thing that we have that capability, but I know lots of guys that compartmentalized their whole lives, and then all of a sudden it all came like they went off that cliff we were talking about earlier. But then what? When you've compartmentalized kind of everything and you're going through, absolute mental and physical, emotional exhaustion, how do you go forward? How do you keep moving from that point? What would you guys' thoughts be on that one? Sean, I'm going to hit you first. What do you think?
Well, sure. I'm going to give it, obviously not from a doctor's point of view. I'm just going to give it from my point of view. And so, to your question, Chance, you have talked about compartmentalizing things to a degree where maybe a guy's in the hurt locker. Am I paraphrasing it correctly?
Yep.
Fair enough. So, okay, big deal. You didn't die yesterday, so you're still here. And so, irrespective of how someone has compartmentalized their entire life, you're still fine. But you've got room to improve. You're not dead yet. You're still breathing. So I know it's going to sound lame, but if you're breathing, there's still hope. And the hope is this, that you get better. That's your hope, right? Chance? That's what we're talking about. We're talking about you're in the hurt locker. You've compartmentalized your life. You're still breathing. You want to get better. Well, good, because you can. Now, where it all goes wrong, I believe, is that when someone decides, I want to get better, they want to be at the finish line now. Well, bro, you just realized just now that you're compartmentalizing things and you got to recover. So take your freaking time. As I mentioned earlier, it's about frequency and intensity. You get to set the pace. 1 out of 10, 9 out of 10. You get to set how frequently on that pace. Every day, every week, every 5 minutes. Whatever you want to do, it's for you to control the lever of your life. The best news is when you realize that you've been compartmentalizing things to a degree where you're not functioning as well as you want, well, congratulations. You just got the best Christmas present ever. You now know where you're at and what you want. That's just time and velocity. And by the way, all of that compartmentalization and all those hopes to improve, it doesn't have to be a solo journey. In whatever you've got going on, there's professionals all around you, health professionals, who can support you in moving forward. Okay, So you don't like health professionals. You've got friends. You've got friends who've got some pro tips because they've made mistakes. They've learned some lessons, and they're going to throw some ideas at you. And by the way, if their ideas suck, no big deal. You get to listen to those terrible ideas and think, that sucks. I need better ideas. Any input is good input as long as you sit with that input and critically think, is that good for me right now? Would that work for me right now? How would I do that better right now? So you've got professionals, you've got friends, but you know what the best tool is? You. The moment that you realize that you need to get better, you need to recover, you've now become your own best ally by recognizing that. Where I do believe this third part goes wrong, you helping you, is the misbelief that you can't solve all of this yourself. You can. The journey that we're in this universe called life, this grand experiment, it is a solo journey surrounded by other solo journeyists. Now, we can all get together and live a great life as a community or as a family or as partners or as me with my kids. But at the end of the day, it's us in our internal world figuring out an external world and how to do it to the best of our ability. So get good at getting good with yourself. That's what I would say most people need to focus on.
Bam. I like it. Dan, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm reminded of some guys that I've worked with that have had very active ECF careers, who they almost, because they're spending so much time overseas, shutting down a lot of their feelings. I remember one of them telling me just one of the first trips they went on, he was an officer, had one of his guys die pretty damn early in the trip, and he went into like a portal and just cried for a while, and he said it really took him out for that day, and he said, I can't, these guys are looking at me, I can't act like this, they need to see strength from me. So then what I did was, every time someone died or something hard happened, the feelings come up and went, nope, can't feel this right now, and that needs to be stuffed down right now. And it was really helpful. He became a rock in a leadership position, which is doubly a rock for the unit. But then when he rotated back into country and he was still in that, like, I've done it for so long, I don't actually know how to do this, that it took quite some time to give him space. Trust is obviously a huge thing for these guys. They don't like to talk about their feelings a lot of the time, but they will, and also who they talk them with is very important, but creating a really safe space to be able to peel back those layers particularly. And you don't want to do this in theater, absolutely not. You can unravel doing this with someone in the moment. You don't wait till they're back, maybe finished up their career, and then start to, okay, let's tease this apart. That was really helpful to get you through and other people through, not just emotionally, but lives dependent on that. Let's start peeling back those layers and start really playing and healing and going through process of recovery that would have been too big at that time to address. It's where some of the professionals can come in, and you can do it yourself. I wholeheartedly agree with that, Sean. But just I thought I'd throw in there a little vote for a biased vote for mental health professionals, good ones.
Yeah, could not agree more with that one. My doc helped me get through quite a bit. I would have probably been able to get through myself, but it's always good to have help. Gino, you got any thoughts on this?
It's a lot of really good points, man. I mean, Dan, you just said something that's important, man. It's mental health professionals, but good ones, right? I think that is something like any profession, and people forget this, right? Like, man, you've got some great physicians out there, and you have some not so great physicians. You got great attorneys and not so great. You got great plumbers, not so great plumbers, right? You're not going to see something different, right, within the field of behavioral health, right? There's really good ones, and there's plenty of not so good, right? And so, just making sure, in a very applied sense, you do your due diligence, right? And there's nothing wrong with interviewing a potential provider, right? And just have an initial discussion, man. See if the energy's there, right? See if it makes sense. Like, could you build a bridge, right? Versus forcing yourself to go to someone that maybe 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 sessions in, it's not a good fit, because that brings along a whole different level of discouragement, right? Within the perception of the field of behavioral health in of itself, right? And then you have to ask yourself, well, did I do my due diligence? And 9 times out of 10, when you're in that spot, you don't want to ask yourself that question. You just want to go and get help, man, right? From someone. You're like, they got the letters, the alphabet behind their name. They must be the right fit, right? No, because you're still dealing with another human being, right? And so you got to make sure human to human, right? There's a good connection there. There's a good vibe there. But, one of the things I will say about compartmentalization, right? So 1000%, there is absolutely value and a time and a place for it. One thing I will say is compartmentalization, right? Without eventual recognition of that compartment, right? Where we just keep pushing it and pushing it and pushing it. Look, whenever we compartmentalize things, even though we don't realize it, right? It's earning interest. It's compounded interest at that, right? And it's there subconsciously, right? And every time we make a subconscious decision not to unpack that box because we have other tasks, right, that require our energy and our caloric burn, right? That thing that was like this is slowly steady growing, right? And then eventually when we don't address it, right, it will consume us and can very much lead to the cliff that we are all talking about, right? So there is a time and a place for compartmentalization, 1000%. You got to get through stuff. But there's also a huge time and a place to recognize, well, what have I compartmentalized and what needs to be unpacked? And listen, to get to a place where you're on the journey, which all of us should be, right? To this idea of self-mastery, right? This idea of really getting a full deep dive systematically of who we are, what we stand for, and our place in the world, and how to best control all the microsystems that make us up as beings, right? Along that way, man, like social capital does matter. Relationships absolutely do matter because they feed, right, those inner voices inside your head and give you new thoughts, right, and propose different ways of looking at things and different perceptions that can be very helpful because it's coming from other human beings or who are on their own journey, to Sean's point, right? But having the discernment to understand that I've put this over here and I've put that over there, and that's okay for right now. But I also know that I'm going to give myself 10 days, right, to not go there. But at day 11, guess what? It's time to unpack. It's time to see what is we got there, clean out the closet, right? Because we have to make room for new stuff that's coming down the line. And it's not a question of if, it's when.
Yeah, 100% on that one. Now, I know you got to bounce there, Gino, and I cannot thank you enough for joining us once again. It is always
it's
a blast.
Unfortunate because I was just about to drop into compound interest and how valuable that can be, which I'm going to do. But you won't be here, so that's okay.
But I'll be dialing in. I'll be dialing in to take a look at what you say, sir. 100%.
There we go.
That's good seeing you, pal.
Let's any final thoughts before you jump out? Anything still burning in the back of your brain on recovery, longevity, anything at all?
No, man. I think the biggest thing, right, is a huge push for us to embrace recovery and understand it's a very healthy, it's a very good thing, right? Just depending on I know that the context, right? But in general, it has to be a staple because we have to understand that, again, we're human beings, not human machines, right? So there is no physical battery that we're switching in and switching out, right? Not to be a bum, but it's a collective, right? Our identity is very much that. There's many parts that make us who we are, and we have to take care of and nurture and rest those parts so they can continue doing the job that they need to do.
Bam. Always bring in the fire, Doc Gino. I really, again, appreciate you joining us, brother.
Man, such a privilege, bro. Thank you, guys.
We'll see you next time.
All right, gents. Later.
Peace. Sean, you got some thoughts?
I do. So on the compound interest thing, it's kind of interesting. I mean, it's an interesting idea that if you're compartmentalizing things, putting it down to level 27, locking it up in that little box and leaving it alone for a long time, that can be problematic, of course. I mean, eventually it's going to bubble up. It's not like you get to throw on a Romulan cloaking device and ignore it for the rest of your life. Guaranteed it's going to come back. Now, the thing I find interesting about the compounding interest aspect of locking something down at level 27, if you give it enough years, of course, it grows and grows and grows. And through compound interest, it's growing not linear, but exponentially to some degree. So eventually, that little thing that you could have dealt with initially has grown up into such a big deal that it's going to make a mark in your life. Like, it's not going to be something that you're going to deal with in half a day. You're going to spend like weeks, perhaps, when you finally get around to thinking about it, when you finally get around to thinking about that compounding interest lockdown. Weeks, months, years, maybe. Now, at that point that you start unwrapping your compounding interest problem or issue, you know that that's on you. I mean, you did it to yourself. We all know that. It's not like someone else did it to us. We did it to us. And so you got to accept that, okay, that's on me. And I let it grow to such a degree that now it's a big deal. Okay, but I still got to deal with it. At this point, you can choose a negative or a positive. The negative would be, this is going to be hellacious. I'm going to have to work through this. This is going to be years. I'm going to dehydrate from all the crying I'm going to do. I got to go buy more electrolytes and all of this stuff. Or, all right, here we go. I did let this go too long. And now I'm facing it. But it grew to such a point that by the end of this, I'm going to be a better person for it because of all the things that I've now got to learn to face this thing, to work through it, to get in front of it. And so whether you deal with something in 10 days or 10 years, there's interest. The longer it goes, the more it grows. But eventually, when you pull it out of the bank to deal with it, well, perhaps if you use a positive path, that extraction out of the bank is maybe one of the best withdrawals you'll ever make in your life.
This is it's a really great allegory for health in general, I think, in terms of if you think about banking, or if you're going to invest in yourself physically, right, early on, and you are a fit individual, then you're going to be able to make those withdrawals quite well because you're investing in yourself. But if you rack up a ton of debt, let's say, belly fat or lots of Doritos, then you're going to have to pay that back at some point, and the interest is not pleasant on credit cards for sure. Dan, you got any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I do, and I love the phrase like "slay the dragon when it's small," as a roundabout way to say don't avoid things, and it's something we do in clinical practice. We know whenever there's some sort of anxiety disorder, it's part of criteria for post-traumatic stress is that there's going to be some avoidance here. It can be physical avoidance, like I avoid going into the bush, into the forest, because that's what it was like in Vietnam. Or it can be, I don't think about certain things that triggers memories, or I don't approach social situations because I find that overwhelming. We know that avoidance over time grows the anxiety. It's that 2-for-1 of it's uncomfortable in the moment, you're avoiding that, but it grows. And conversely, the short version of therapy is the opposite. What are we avoiding? Let's start approaching that. Of course, you give tools to help manage that, but at the crux of it, what are we avoiding? Let's start chasing that. So that dragon, I'm shaking this allegory now, the dragon starts to shrink.
When there's I think when we ruminate especially about those problems, we start thinking about how big of a deal it is. I know for me, crowds was a big one where I just couldn't stand being around a ton of people, and that I would avoid any type of gathering, any type in general. So I wouldn't go to the grocery store, I wouldn't go to Costco, I wouldn't go to wherever because there were crowds. And slowly over the years, my doc has hit me many times with maybe you should just go hang out in the parking lot. Just see how that feels. Manage that and then leave. Maybe walk into the lobby, stand there for a few minutes, see how that feels. And slowly to the point now where I go with my friends, I go with my family, I go out and do things that are in crowds. That I went to a bare knuckle boxing fight the other day. That was a very serious test of my capabilities, but 5 years ago, that would have never, ever happened. I would have not even entered that crowd to begin with. That's a fantastic point. And I have a question for you guys in terms of that. In that we see a lot of talk about injury prevention. Let's put it that way. Is that, we want to prevent injuries ahead of time. We want to be able to make sure that we're ready. And this applies physically, mentally, emotionally, all these things. But is it really the thing we want to seek? Like preventing the injury itself? Or is it more the management of the injury itself? Because it seems to me like you're never going to make it through any sort of high performance career or really life in general without being injured. So do you think it's more about prevention or management? I'm going to come right back to you, Dan. What do you think?
Yes. I'll answer that. I think it's both. You're right. You can't, if you're doing really hard athletic stuff, you can't get around it. Some injury's going to come up. And I've been learning to manage that and still move forward in training. I think is more important than to preventing. Certainly, there's injury predictors like. One of the best ones is just raw strength. Like, do you have enough contractile strength, has enough connective strength in your muscles so that when you do hard things, you get out of position, that you can cope with that. It's just raw strength to a limit. But like I work with guys who in and out of the field, they're young and have lots of ideas about what training should look like. So we're constantly changing things. And I know you can almost predict how successful they're going to be, whether they go, oh, I'm injured, I need to stop training, or they go, I'm injured, what can I do to keep doing? Okay, my calves are strained. Okay, let's do some assault bike work or some rowing, or it doesn't come up when you're pack marching or rucking. Okay, let's do that for a bit. Keep developing your aerobic base. Like there's so many things you can do. Be ideal if you kept on running, but not at the expense of your calf, for example. Yeah.
Who needs that calf anyway? I don't need that right now. Sean, thoughts on this?
First, I just want to go back to the little dragon, slaying the little dragon. I agree. Always ram the spear through the dragon's chest when it's really small so that you feel like you're killing a baby dragon. But big deal. The dragon grows up. Now it's a full-blown dragon. Years later, you got a dragon with its wings all out and it's about to shoot fire at you. You know what's even more satisfying than slaying a baby dragon? Ramming a spear through a full-grown dragon. I love that, man. It's way more satisfying to defeat something that looks indefeatable or undefeatable. I love that. I love slaying something that I don't think I can slay. Little dragons are easy to slay, and we all should. Slay those baby dragons. But when it grows up into a big dragon, all right, big deal. I think that it's more heroic to slay a full-grown dragon. Am I wrong? The hero's journey, as it were. If you're facing the terror of a full-grown dragon and you beat it, it's heroic, man. And so, yeah, we should always try to get in front of these problems. But if we didn't, if we compartmentalize, if we let it manifest into something that is terrifying, frickin' grab a spear and run it straight through the chest. It might take a bit of time and conviction, but it's all very doable. A spear will take care of anything. So, moving on to this question. I think that there's never been a time in my life when I haven't been injured. Ever. Maybe in high school. I don't even recall. But ever since then, there's never been a time when I haven't got injuries. Right to today, I've got all the injuries. And about 10 years from now, I'll have more injuries. And along the way, I'll figure those out. I've never stopped doing. I've just figured out ways to improvise, adapt, and overcome. And I think that that's probably one of the great lessons in life, is not laying down when things get tough, not kicking back, watching the baby dragon grow into a big dragon. It is engaging in life with a certain amount of ferocity, a certain amount of commitment, where you won't be swayed from what you want. You can maybe course correct a touch, but eventually you're going to get back to what you want. You got to want it bad enough that you'll find ways to get what you want. If you don't want it bad enough, a minor strain will have you laid up for 12 and a half years. And then you can talk about how cool you were when you were the football captain when you got that strain in high school. When you're 30 years old, you'll still be telling that story. But those stories suck, man. They're baby dragon stories. Go slay the hard thing of the day. And if you don't slay it today, you'll slay it in the future. But never, ever, ever let life get out of your control. And if it does, grab a spear.
I really like that, just because I like having a spear around, at least in my mind. Dan, you got any thoughts on this?
I just love how dangerously close we got to. Man, I just love having babies. Through that discussion,
I was thinking.
No, I wholeheartedly agree. I think violence of action is an important guiding principle to having a life that's worth living. I don't think I would have said that maybe 20 years ago, or I would have glorified that. But having gone through what I have now already, went, oh, those moments where I had to gut check and move through things that I didn't think I have, those were the important learning blocks that made me go, at the moment, well, I can get through this. I've done all these other things in the past and I was fine. Yeah, maybe I don't know what that path is going to look like moving forward, but I've felt that way before and it's been okay. I know if I, move to the next tree and figure out from there, I'll be okay. You can't just tell someone that. You can't write that down 100 times. You need experiences of facing adversity over and over again to learn that, to bake that into your nervous system. So I wholeheartedly agree, Sean. And I do need to wrap up in a few minutes. This is a clinic day for me.
Yep. No worries. We can hit this. I was just picturing walking around town with a spear, and when somebody's like, "Hey man, what are you doing with the spear?" You'd be like, "Killing baby dragons. It's all good."
Yeah, my psychologist Dan told me to.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. He set us up for this. Okay, well, if you got to run, that's all good. I have one last question for you guys, if that's cool, before we do some final thoughts, and that is, we've talked a lot about the differences between when we were young and when we were old, or what? Not old. Well, maybe Sean is old, but the rest of us, when the differences between that. But I'm wondering, what did recovery look like then versus now? And like, how has your approach to it changed over time? Dan, I'm going to come right back to you. What do you think?
I think I used to think recovery was doing more things, doing ice bathing, sauna. I need this Theragun. I need to do this mindfulness practice. I need to do more to get more recovery. And I think my perspective on that has changed. That kind of like what we talked about with the allostatic load. That if you just stop pouring water in the jug that's overflowing, if you kind of empty that out a bit and take a few things off your plate, that's actually going to go a lot further than potentially trying to do more things. When it's 8 o'clock at night, you're tired from training, you're exhausted, you just want to connect with your wife, but you've got a 30-minute stretch routine that you need to do before bed, or hold on a sec, you're missing the point here, I think. So I think doing less is an effective recovery strategy. That's something my mind has changed on as I've grown more grays.
Yeah, I love that. In order to recover better, we actually take things away rather than add new stuff. I love that. Sean, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, to build off of what was just said, you could spend your time all day long doing incredible work and smashing it out of the park, and then at 8 o'clock at night, instead of like decompressing, instead of offloading your central nervous system, instead of just chillaxing, you're now researching red light therapy, and you're trying to figure out which is the best bang for the buck model that you're going to buy from some brand that you know nothing about. You don't know if it's going to work for you or not, but now you're going to spend weeks researching red light therapy. And so instead of researching the latest widget, just take a freaking moment, a couple of big psychological sighs, just chillax. To Dan's point, more is not always better. But the reverse of that is less is not always better. It all depends on who you are and where you are in this game. So you asked for the oldies like me. Man, I had to do a lot of dumb things to figure out how to do it better. And so I've researched red light therapy. Do I own one? No. But I'm curious. And I think that's the important piece of this is there's nothing wrong with learning more about how to do things better. You've just got to manage all of that learning more.
That is a fantastic point. And on that note, I think we can shut her down for the afternoon. It has been a fantastic conversation. I'm going to have to set this up again and see if I can't get, if I'm going to get all three of these guys back on, and we're going to talk about longevity. We talked about recovery for this whole thing. So next time we're going to talk about longevity. It's going to be a good one. All right. Well, any final thoughts? Anything on the back of your brain still bubbling around, Dan? Anything at all?
Nothing from me. We've had a great cast on today that have stolen my thunder enough times. So that's all the thoughts I have for today.
Love it. Sean, any final thoughts?
It was great hanging out with the docs. And for anyone who's listening to this and is still caught 10 minutes ago in the podcast thinking, why kill a baby dragon? We're just having a bit of fun. But it is something to consider at a deeper level. What you're trying to slay in your day is who you are today.
That is a fantastic point. And I don't really have anything left to add. I'm going to steal something from Musashi's work, where he always says at the end of everything he talks about, he always goes, this should be considered well. And I think that this whole conversation should be considered well. So thanks, everybody, as we all continue to learn, build, and grow. We'll see you next week.